What is up, everybody? Welcome on into the First Round Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host this morning, Jacob Bartley. I am joined by Justin Moe. What's going on, Justin?
Chilling. Midway season point, I'm trying to get everything in order, but so far so good. Got some nice waiver wire pickups that I'm happy about. So I'm looking forward to this week and W's all around.
Awesome. We will maybe touch on some of those waiver wire pickups here in a second. Real quick, Justin, was there anything that stood out to you big in week 8? Or other than the injuries and stuff we're gonna talk about?
A couple things. Rams are real Super Bowl contenders. That offense is crazy.
And they just got Von Miller, which
it's nutty.
can only help their defense.
Yeah, and good defense leads to good offense, so that should be crazy. The Dakless Cowboys beat the Vikings. That was pretty disgusting. Amari got a nice touchdown, but he's become pretty secure after a couple down weeks. The Saints are a question now with no Jameis. A lot of interesting stuff. What about you? What stood out for you?
Yeah, there was a lot of different things that stood out to me, but I just gotta say I'm loving the consistency from Najee Harris, man. It's like no matter what, he gets it done. And I have him in a dynasty league and a keeper league. And I was a little worried coming into the year. I was like, should I trade him in one of those leagues so I don't, have too much invested in him? But I'm so glad I didn't do that because what a stud. Like, remember last year how we were drafting Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the middle of the first round? Like, Najee actually earned that. Like, he wasn't even drafted in the first round. So that's what's crazy is he was drafted in the second round in a lot of leagues, and he should have been a top 5 pick in my opinion, which is crazy.
I don't think anybody that drafted Najee is upset at all. It doesn't matter.
Of course not. No matter what, even if they took him in the first round.
And I'm happy you brought up Seb because I think like that's recency bias at its finest. Like, oh, I drafted Clyde, it didn't work out. I don't want to draft this rookie early on.
Exactly.
And then you miss him, and then he's top 5 running back basically, and you're like, damn, he's a stud. Like this is legit. But yeah, him and DeAndre Swift and JT, good futures ahead for the running back position.
Yeah, and just overall for the season so far, I'm looking back at our rankings, right? And when we did those, and it's like our rankings are so similar to what everybody else's rankings are. Like there's a few differences in there. Like we were high on certain guys or low on certain guys. But I feel like overall, like the whole fantasy industry, like they're pretty safe with predictions going into the year. And it's like I need to do more things like gut calls. Like I'm not saying I thought Cooper Kupp was going to be the number 1 wide receiver on the year, but I had him at 13. And that's pretty high compared to everybody else. So I'm wondering, like, those type of things like Mike Williams, Cooper Kupp, I'm going to try to look more for those type of things going into these years because those have been, like, league winners this year so far, which is insane.
Legitimately. And the worst part is, though, it's hard for us to predict because it's like we like Stafford, but he was a Lion for so long. And you're like, okay, how much is it the team versus how much is it the actual player? And then the player gets released from the bad team, and it's like, wow, he was being held back that much. Like, that's insane. So, it's hard to go out on a limb like that.
True.
That's why nobody picked Cooper Kupp to be top 1. But, I agree, man. We should have seen Swift and JT bumping up. It's hard to say, like, someone like Cordero Patterson being top 10.
Yeah, there's no way to predict that.
But, yeah, other than that, aside from some injuries that happen, rankings have been pretty safe, but yeah, there's always going to be some hitters that are hidden.
I'm just going to take more big shots next time around. Like, not that I'm going to go crazy, but I'm going to, like, who can be this year's Cooper Kupp? Who can be this year's DeAndre Swift? I'm going to look out for those type of things.
Yeah,
but, before we get to some injuries, some waivers, and our start and sits for week 9, I do want to talk a little bit about something. I know it might sound a little early for this topic, but I kind of did make it the main topic of the show, at least to open the show today, and that is preparing for the fantasy playoffs. Now, depending on if your playoffs start in week 15, which should be the standard now with the extra game, because if you guys don't know, and this goes into preparing for the playoffs. If your league is still set to start the playoffs in week 14, there are bye weeks in week 14. You got to keep that in mind. I know the Colts are on a bye week, and there's one other team that's on a bye week that week. But imagine you go into your week 1 fantasy matchup for the playoffs and you don't have Jonathan Taylor. Like, you don't want to avoid that. So just definitely check with that and maybe get that date changed, because it should be weeks 15, 16, and 17. But I think like on Yahoo, they automatically changed it to that. But who knows? There might be other platforms that still have it on week 14. But it's about 6 weeks away until the fantasy playoffs, and we have trade deadlines coming up. So once these trade deadlines hit, your only flexibility as far as roster moves go are waiver wires, the waiver wire, basically. That's it. So I think there's a few things you should keep an eye on going in. And Dustin, let me know if you agree or disagree with either of these, and let me know if you have any other things to add. So we've been talking about this all year. We always are a proponent of this, and that is get your handcuffs. And your handcuffs to your running backs. And look, I'm not saying give up like something major to get your handcuffs, but just poke around, see if you have a Aaron Jones, see if you can give a couple bench players to get AJ Dillon, something like that. Because just as the weather's getting cold, running back depth is going to get super, super thin and cold, and it's gonna be rough out there when you're going into the playoffs and you're really hurting. And the only thing you can do is scour the waiver wire for a pickup. And it's like in one of our main leagues, I have David Montgomery out, Kareem Hunt out, Nick Chubb was out, but he's been he hasn't been completely healthy. Miles Sanders out, DeAndre Swift on a bye week. It's like I'm starting Nick Chubb and Kenneth Gainwell as my starting running back. So you don't want to do something like that. So be prepared, and at least attempt to get your handcuffs if you can. If not, it's not a big deal. It's not life or death. But I do think if you can trade some smaller pieces to get your handcuffs, it might be worth it.
Agreed. I think any more talk on handcuffs is being dead horse. You got to listen by now.
Yeah,
the proof
definitely.
Is in the pudding.
Yeah, and next thing is, this is not the end all be all, but look at schedules. Like if you're streaming quarterbacks, or you're streaming tight end, or you are considering a trade, look ahead at some of these players' schedules. At the beginning of the season, it's hard to tell what the schedules are going to be. Yes, we have the preseason rankings and what we think defenses are going to be like, etc. But nothing ends up being what we think. Like we thought Washington football team was going to be a shutdown defense. You don't want to start players against them. Turns out it's the complete opposite. But at this point, we have a pretty good idea of what teams are, giving up a lot of fantasy points to wide receivers, to running backs, quarterbacks, tight ends, etc. So, for example, in one of my leagues, I'm streaming quarterbacks every week. I think I've settled on the man Derek Carr, though, because he's been pretty solid. And like I said, just don't kill me if in my fantasy lineup for my quarterback. And like if you look at his schedule, he has a pretty darn cake schedule. Even from week 9 on, he has a couple tough matchups, but basically his season for the rest of the year, other than maybe week 16 against Denver, is pretty cake. And I'm like, okay, I'm good with Derek Carr. So keep an eye out, not just for quarterbacks, but for all players. Look at the schedules, and look, just because they have an easy schedule doesn't mean they're going to perform, or just because they have a hard schedule doesn't mean they're not going to perform. But I do think it's something to look at. Do you consider that at all when you're trading for a player or picking a player up, Justin?
Yeah, 100%. I just made a trade actually to shore up a quarterback, and I got Moss on the back end as my running back, and I looked at his schedule and said, I'm not the biggest fan of him. I know people are liking him more, sure, but I'm looking at Jacksonville, the Jets, Indy, New Orleans, New England, like two in a row smash matchups. Like that's gonna help me get into the playoffs. And if he's my flex player, like I'm happy. So what you're saying is absolutely true. This is the time that you like I was impressed that our league mates stashed the Bills defense and the Bills kicker. Like I was pretty impressed. I'm like, this is some discipline to accept the fact that you're rostering a bye week defense, and
Wow.
it's just winning moves because when you have a set it and forget it defense, your life is so much easier. So look at strength of schedule. It's real now that we know what teams are basically.
And that's a good point that I didn't even mention is for your defense and special teams. Look at schedules for that. You could hit a team that could help you win. Like if you hit a solid special teams defense, that they can truly contribute to your team winning. So like a Bills or something like that, and that's something to look at those type of even kickers, I guess. If there's a lot of shootouts looking ahead on their schedule, getting in the red zone, getting field goals, it's definitely good. So yeah, so it's definitely schedules. And one other thing I think, and this doesn't apply for most years because prior to COVID times, everybody was like, oh, you don't need to roster a backup quarterback. Like just you can have one and you're fine in one QB league. But I think that and this is perfect. Aaron Rodgers suddenly out of nowhere tests positive for COVID-19. He's out. The soonest he can come back is November 13th, which is Saturday of next week, and that's the soonest. So he could possibly even miss that game. He could miss 2 games in a row. So let's say it's past the trade deadline. The fantasy playoffs are this week, and Aaron Rodgers is out due to COVID. And now you're scouring the waiver wire. There's nothing for quarterback. So maybe plan ahead. If you have an extra roster spot, throw another upside guy at the end of your bench. I don't mind doing that at this point in the season.
Agreed. Especially in a stingy league where people roster 2 QBs, you don't want to be the guy that doesn't get a bad week because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just depends, right? I mean, anybody can be out, right? But I just think with this COVID situation, like even if you have a Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, Brady, like anybody can miss. So that you got to keep that in mind. Yeah, we got a viewer, Jeremy Cravat. Hey, what's up, man? Yeah, I start work at noon, so I will see you later at work. Thanks for stopping by.
Hounded on the podcast, the morning work hustle for the afternoon hustle.
I know, right? I know. Justin, so those were just a couple points I had. Do you have any other, ideas about preparing for the playoffs, or was that pretty much it?
Yeah. I think now's the time to consolidate. Depth is beautiful, but injuries happen, and it's time to take advantage of your depth. So if you have a
Good
league mate,
point.
if you have a league mate that's having QB problems, having running back problems, which probably half the league is at this point, and you have a couple extra running backs, you trade up. You want to get those Tyreek Hills of the world for cheap. You want to get. It's just hard because I've been on that position where you're like, you just mentioned you have to start Gainwell and Chubb, which is not the worst. I've had to start worse week in and week out because of injuries and lack of waiver wire options. And that it's a weird desperation that you only feel if you're going through it. So you find those players that need those running backs that you consider depth and they need them to start, you're going to get paid for them. So get yourself a top 10 wide receiver, a top 5 quarterback. Maybe it's okay to trade. I know tight end has been kind of off. Even Kelsey's had some off weeks, right? But maybe it's time to trade up to go get Waller or go get Kelsey and have your solid starting lineup going into the playoffs. That's my number one strategy that I try to do every year.
That is a great point. And there are those teams who drafted Kelsey or Waller and they're on the brink of missing the playoffs and they lost a lot of running backs or receivers and they're hurting and they're willing to trade that player when they normally wouldn't be. So that's a great point, Justin, to bring up for sure. All right, so let's run down some quick injury news. I mean, there's a lot going on, but I'll go ahead and run it down real quick, Justin, and you just talk about what stands out to you real quick. So we all know terrible news. Derrick Henry is out indefinitely with his foot injury. Could make a late season comeback, so definitely wouldn't drop him, but yeah, he's going to be out for a while. And if he does come back, it's going to be during the fantasy playoffs. So keep an eye out for that. We have Jameis Winston, torn ACL, out for the season. Robert Tonyan is also out for the season. We talked about this earlier. Aaron Rodgers tests positive for COVID. He will at least miss this week. Earliest he can be back is November 13th, which is next Saturday. Saquon is not practicing. He has an ankle injury, but he practiced last week, so nobody knows exactly why he's missing. Dak is participating fully in a shortened practice today. Kyler was not at the open part of practice. And Justin, you might have to give me more information on this Kyler injury. I wasn't aware it was that serious, so maybe we'll get into that in a second. Apparently, Michael Thomas is out for the year. Do we know why that is? Did they say why?
Not that I found. I was looking and it's just out for the year. I guess he went to see a specialist or something. It was like short, just a formality, I think. I don't know if it's the true reason.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Sounds a little fishy over there. And of course, unfortunately, Calvin Ridley is stepping away for now to deal with just to take care of himself mentally, basically. And so we don't know what that means. Like, I don't think he opted out of the season so I think he can technically return anytime he wants. So we'll see how that goes. Couple other things to keep your eye on. CMC is designated to return from IR. Don't get your hopes up. As a CMC manager, I just assume he's not playing, and if he does, amazing. But we'll see. And Michael Gallup could play Sunday for the Dallas Cowboys. That's definitely exciting. A couple things to monitor. James Robinson, he had a heel injury. He's day to day. Sam Darnold is in concussion protocol. Jalen Rager has an ankle injury. Robert Gronkowski back spasms. T.Y. Hilton concussion protocol. Damian Williams with a knee injury, so maybe a fire up Khalil Herbert if he misses again, and Justin Jackson quad injury. So Justin, any of these stand out to you that you want to talk on real quick?
Yeah. Happy Dak's back. We need that offense kicking up again. Sucks for Green Bay. Tonyan was getting it right, and that was just awful to see. Taysom Hill might be some play to watch if you're having QB problems, depending on how your league scores. Maybe he gets a little variable action. I don't know. But Kyler, I read he was week to week. When he banged up his ankle in the last play or last drive, he stuck through it, and then he became week to week. So he might sit out this week, but Thursday is going to be a big day. We got to see what happens tomorrow. If he practices, he should be good. If he doesn't, probably not. Calvin Ridley owners, they're sad, but now they're even more sad because maybe they're going to try to trade him. It's just news you can't prepare for. But the overall thing is I'm sick that CMC just basically hasn't played for 2 years. And it's just like we need all the players we can get. And this guy's a freaking beast and a joy to watch. And I just don't understand at this point. It just seems too odd.
Yeah, and he's one of those that, like, even if you don't roster him, you still want him to be healthy. It just makes fantasy football and football more fun. So, yeah, that one definitely hurts. Yeah. Real quick, before we talk about some waiver wires, Jeremy Cravat writes, now is the time to get Elijah Moore before it's too late. He's going to rock it moving forward. Do you agree with that, Justin?
Hard to say. I mean, I don't know who's their quarterback long term, and I don't know enough about the boy Mike White, right? So they had a nice week. I was actually posturing by starting Laviska in my dynasty league, but I really secretly wanted to start Elijah, but no one bid on a trade, So that's also an interesting tactic, by the way. If you start the players you want to trade, people think you hold more value to them. As a side note, so.
That's a good point. Yeah,
I'm comfortable starting Elijah Moore going forward. If you don't have many options, he seems to be a nice rookie. So take it from the Jets fan, Jeremy. I trust you this week, bud.
Yeah, and in full PPR, he had 13 fantasy points, six for 67 yards. That's really nice, and I would like to see him improve upon that. I think he could going forward. And obviously, Corey Davis was out, but we'll see. That's good signs for him going forward. For sure. All right, let's touch on now. In most leagues, waivers have processed already, but I play in one other platform, Justin, and those waivers process at 7 p.m. tonight. So I'm actually kind of glad because that way I don't have to do them with my Yahoo waivers. So some people might still be looking for waivers out there, but also some of these guys might still be available. Even if some of your teammates might not have picked them up for sure, your league mates. So some that I think are mentionable are Boston Scott, of course, of the Philadelphia Eagles. We thought Kenneth Gainwell is going to be the man there. And look, I'm not giving up on Kenneth Gainwell yet. I think that was all game script, and for some reason they view Kenneth as the pass catching back only. So I think we'll see. They're playing the Chargers this week. I think he's going to have a much better game. And Boston Scott will still be good, though, so he's definitely worth picking up. So we have over there in Tennessee, we have Jeremy McNichols and Adrian Peterson. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that in a minute here, Justin. But some other notables, Elijah Moore, which I just talked about. If you need a tight end, I do not mind picking up Pat Freiermuth. I'm in one other dynasty league, Justin, and I picked him up before last week. He had a nice 14 points in full PPR. I was very happy to see that from Pat Freiermuth of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Eric Ebron was out. He might be back this week, so something to keep an eye on. If you are hurting at QB, Taysom Hill's a nice pickup, and I wouldn't mind taking a flyer on Justin Fields after his really good performance against the 49ers last week. So, Justin, I want to know if you are running back needy, maybe you lost Derrick Henry, or maybe not, you're just running back needy, and you can have the choice of picking up Adrian Peterson or Jeremy McNichols from the Tennessee Titans. Which one are you taking?
I gotta go Jeremy. At this point in AP's career, even if he's the workhorse, it's not going to count to much. I rather take the flyer and hope McNichols comes out strong, gets a touchdown, and just saves my week a little bit. You never can expect anything close to what Henry was doing, but if I can get 12 or 15 points, I'll be loving it. So I'm going to pass on AP now. At best, he's going to be a James Conner light vulture guy, but I mean, what are you going to do with that?
That's a good point. He's not going to step in and do what Henry was doing. And even if, like, I could see him getting, 13 carries for 65 yards, but no catches. And it's like, okay, that got me 6.5 fantasy points. It seems like it should get you more fantasy points, right? But it doesn't. It's 6.5. But we've seen Jeremy McNichols be really, really active in the passing game. So, and look, most of us play in full PPR or even have PPR. So I agree. I would lean McNichols there. Justin, any other waiver wires pickups you want to touch on, whether it's some of these or any other ones?
No, I think he covers it. Just some running back problems. I love the Pat pick. He could be good. And tight ends just – I was looking at it earlier, talking about Kelsey and Waller, and it's like they're not even – I mean, Kelsey's tight end 1, but Waller's like out of the top 5. It's just –
yeah.
I thought every year I think it's going to be a little bit better. It's just so bad right now. It's hard to – you can't go wrong. Like, you're just going to be hoping someone gets at least 6 or 5 catches or a touchdown to save the week. But other than that, there's no one really you're depending on week in, week out, like for tight end. Literally, that's how it is this year.
Yeah, it's very rough. You just need, I mean, obviously you still want a Kelsey or Waller, but you need those guys who can blow up like a Hawkinson or a Pitts. Like, even though they're going to give you inconsistencies throughout the year, and one week they're going to have 3 points and the next week they're going to have 30 points, I'll take that over 7 points every week, So
on the upside, I think Kittle's coming off of the IR, so he might play this week.
Yeah, that's something also to keep an eye on that we didn't mention. All right, so let's get into our dark horses segment for week 9. So real quick, we'll review last week's. So last week, Gabe had chosen Jerry Jeudy as his dark horse, and I would go ahead and mark that as a miss. He didn't do that great, but he didn't have a terrible game, but definitely not a blow-up game like Gabe was anticipating. I went with Darrell Williams, and I think it's safe to say full PPR, he gave you 17 points. I will take that as a victory lap right there. Of course we love these 25, 30-point games, but you get me 17 points. I am very satisfied with that as a fantasy manager. And then we had Justin, who had chosen, let me see here, Chase Claypool against Cleveland. He did not have a great game, unfortunately, Justin.
Yeah, he got some decent targets, but it was a weird game. So whatever. Najee's just the man over there. Whatever. Claypool didn't do it.
Yeah. What can you do? All right, let's get into our dark horses for this week. And I'll go ahead and start us off real quick. And look, this is an interesting one. I'm trying to choose a guy that people haven't been starting that they possibly could start this week. And I'm going to go with the San Francisco 49ers, Brandon Ayuk. Now, I don't think that you're going to force him into your lineup this week, but they're playing the Cardinals. I think it's going to be a shootout, and we'll keep an eye on Kyler because in my mind, Kyler's playing in this game, and that means that the Niners are going to have to throw it to keep up with him. But look, Brandon Ayuk, he's been one of the biggest disappointments this year as far as what people were expecting. But they're kind of getting him back in the mix. Last week he had 1 target, but 3 weeks before that he had 4 targets, 3 targets, 6 targets. He had a touchdown in week 3. And then this past week, he had 7 targets, 4 catches, 45 yards. I just think the involvement is improving, and I never doubted that his talent just disappeared. I think that, and we've talked about this all year, I honestly think Kyle Shanahan is just set in his ways, and he's going to do what he wants to do, and it doesn't matter your status or what you did last year or – if you think you're good, like he's going to play who he wants to play. And that's just the way it is. But I do think that that being the case, I think he's easing Brandon Ayuk back into the fold. And I think it's to the point where there's no limitations on Ayuk anymore. And I think that he's set up to perform now that he's running most of the routes and all that. So I do think you could potentially fire Brandon Ayuk up. Now, probably in like 10-team leagues with 1 flex, you're not doing it. But if you start 2 flex or you're in a deeper league, something like that, I think you could fire up Brandon Ayuk. It's not, I'm not going to put $100 on this pick, but I do think he's startable now, basically.
Okay, that's definitely going out on a limb. I'll wait to see.
Yeah, sticking my neck out. And I guess you could say, Justin, you're sticking your neck out with this next pick because this is a guy that you've been somewhat disappointed with. So who do you got for us?
My main man, Laviska Shenault. And I know he came out that nice week. Shark gets injured out for the year, and you go and swoop him up. We all wanted big things to happen, but just like the Lions, that team's a bit of a disaster week in, week out. So it's hard for me to blame the player more the team, but either way, the player is underperforming. But we spoke about my choice between him versus Elijah Moore. I'm just gonna say Laviska is gonna be a nice dark horse this week, strictly due to the matchup. They're playing Buffalo. There's zero expectation for me to think Jacksonville is gonna beat Buffalo. Zero expectation for me to think that Buffalo's not gonna put up 40 on them. That means Trevor Lawrence, instead of having to throw 50, is gonna have to throw 65 times. So I think Laviska is gonna catch like 6+, 8+ balls. And with a couple, like, you have some big hitters out this week. You have Seattle, no Metcalf, no Lockett. You have Tampa, no AB, no Godwin, no Evans. You have no McLaurin. So if you need a fill-in for wide receiver, my dark horse got to go Laviska because the matchup just says a lot of passing. So stick with him. You won't be disappointed, I hope.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. It could go the other way, maybe, but we'll see how it goes. It's a tough matchup, but they're only going to be down. It's not. I don't think that game's going to be close or Jacksonville being up, so they're going to have to pass it for sure. So let's move on to our Fool's Gold. We'll review last week's really quick. Gabe went with Tua Tagovailoa. I would say that was a hit. He had a pretty disappointing game. I went with Antonio Gibson if he played. Oh my goodness, how disappointing was that? This man has been another one of the biggest disappointments in fantasy this year. So I hit on that, unfortunately. I don't want to see a man fail. And you chose Saquon, but he didn't end up playing. So we'll go ahead and count that as a push. So let's get into our Fool's Gold for this week, week 9 of the 2021 season. Yeah, go ahead.
On the Gibson McKissick thing, who do you think has more points PPR?
I mean, I want to go McKissick.
Yeah, he does. In our league,
because Gibson has been so disappointing. He had since that game, he had like a 75-yard touchdown. He hasn't done anything.
Yeah, I misread it. He's actually leading McKissick by 4 points. I thought it was 85-91. He has 95 total. McKissick has 91. Still, I consider that disgusting differentiation. But
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, there's so many busts this year, and I think they said he's playing with like a broken shin of hairline.
Yeah, he is.
I don't know why you're running a guy to the ground when you have problems like that. Just really weird way of handling a player that is not doing great anyways. So, yeah,
That's why I chose him as my dark horse last week, because or my fool's gold last week, because it's like this keeps happening every week. Oh, he has a shin injury. He's limited at practice. He might play. Oh, he's gonna play, and it's like I'd rather them just have sat him a couple weeks ago for a few weeks and let him get healthy, and then have him come back and be fully ready to perform. So we'll
yeah.
see, man.
I
That's
think I think we just expected him to be on like the JT level of things, like
yeah.
just like fringe top 10, but he's not even close. It's really bad situation over there.
And that's another thing too. We talked about, looking out for those sleepers like Cooper Cup and things like that. But also, you got to keep an eye out for these guys who are ranked so high, and we just assume they're going to perform, and it's not necessarily the case. There's been a lot of these disappointments here.
Yeah.
All right, Justin. Ooh, this is going to get juicy. I'll go ahead and throw it to you for your fool's gold for week 9.
I'm going with the boy Michael Carter, coming off the biggest game of his career, coming off the nicest play of his career. But they're playing a stout Indy defense, and it's in Indy, and they've been playing really well. I just don't want to start a rookie coming off a hot week expecting another 25 plus game. I'm tempering my expectations. I honestly and am putting my money where my mouth is. I'm starting Zach Moss against Jacksonville over Michael Carter against Indy. He's my sit of the week. I think there are better options for this week, not moving forward. For example, he plays Buffalo, I'll bench, but Miami, Houston, Philly, I like to start him. He's just gone into that range of let me wait and see, but don't bench any stud to start him, is what I'm trying to say.
That's a good point. Yeah, and we're also running back needy, so I think a lot of people are starting him. But I get what you're saying. You see that 30-point performance, and you're like, "How do I bench him?" But I agree with you. Don't go crazy with starting him over, the old reliables here. But we'll see. We'll see how his. So basically, what you think he's gonna underperform his projections? Basically,
Yeah, I mean, he's only projected for 12 and a half. I wasn't really looking at projections because after
yeah.
last week, I think people are like, okay, I got to start him now. I'm expecting near 20. If he ends up with 12 to 15, amazing. But I'm not sure the projections relate what people expect from him. You know what I mean? I'm
Yeah.
gonna say sub 13 game from him.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Definitely. Definitely. All right. So I have changed my fool's gold since we first started the show. I was having trouble finding one, but I kind of settled on one at this point by now. And it's funny because it kind of contradicts your dark horse. And so, because I'm going with Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, I know not everybody's thinking of starting him, but I feel like he's, before last week, all right, he was on a bye, obviously, but prior to that, he had 20 points. And in this league, I'm looking at is 4-point scoring touchdowns. So I'm wondering what his scores are in the 6-point touchdowns, which is what we mostly play in. But Trevor Lawrence, look, he's playing against the Bills, and the Bills are just so nasty and so good on defense. And we see them shutting out these teams. Like, I remember early in the year, what they do, they blew out Miami, and Miami didn't score or something. They had 2 of those games where they put up like 40 on opponents, and the opponents either had a field goal or didn't score at all. I think possibly one of those games are coming for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I think, unfortunately, and I'm rooting for this man for sure, Trevor Lawrence, but I think he's going to throw a couple picks. I think it's going to be an ugly game for the Jaguars. Now, Justin, this doesn't mean that your dark horse can't hit and my fool's gold can't hit. They're not mutually exclusive. They can both happen. Chenault can have a good game while Lawrence has a terrible game. He could still hit Chenault for 90 yards and a touchdown, but then Trevor Lawrence throws 2 picks and doesn't get any rushing yards and maybe only has 200 yards total. So, that doesn't mean that Chenault isn't going to perform. So I think you can do a lot better than Trevor Lawrence. I would avoid him this week. And look, this is definitely not necessarily for, shallow 10-team leagues, but we've talked about it all the time. A lot of leagues everybody rosters 2 quarterbacks, etc. But for example, I'm in a 2 quarterback league. I'm considering starting Jimmy Garoppolo over Trevor Lawrence. And that is, to me, that sounds crazy normally because Jimmy Garoppolo is not a fantasy-friendly quarterback. But last week, he had a really good game. They're playing Arizona, which I think either way is, whether Kyler plays or not, I think Jimmy Garoppolo has opportunity to put up some fantasy points here. I'm not saying start Jimmy Garoppolo in your 1 quarterback leagues. You can find much better options, but I'm saying pivot from Trevor Lawrence. Would you agree with that, Justin?
Yes and no. I kind of expect a traditional Jameis Winston Tampa Bay game out of Lawrence, like 60 passes, 3 touchdowns, 4 picks, 400 yards. But again, I think I'm underestimating the Bills' defense because they don't allow that to happen. So in a 2 QB league, this might be a week to bench him. I can see it. But if he also gets a great fantasy week while having a bad real week, I wouldn't be surprised either. Now you're making me watch.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. But like I said, that really does not mean Chenault's going to have a bad game or any of the wide receivers there.
No, he can go 8 catches for 120 yards and they get blown out. Big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you see, that, even if he does that, for example, was it Monday Night Football the Chiefs played, right? Tyreek Hill had over 20 fantasy points and Mahomes had 13 fantasy points, at some point in the game. So that can happen. Just because your wide receiver is going off doesn't mean your quarterback is, for sure. All right. Yeah, that'll do it for our Fool's Gold and for week 9. And Justin, unless you have anything else you want to bring up for the week, I think that'll do it for this episode, man.
No, I mean, the only thing I don't know if we noted on is that CMC and Darnold, they were both at practice today. So maybe he might play. I don't know. We'll see. They were in uniform. I don't know, but he's someone I want to watch.
Sam Darnold or CMC?
CMC. No, Sam Darnold. I never want to watch that guy. Forget that guy. But
what happened to him? He started off so hot.
Not to mention the sadness that comes with DJ Moore on the back end because of it. He was having such a good start of the year, and with Darnold going, he went too.
Yeah, well, since you brought up CMC, Jeremy makes a good point. Carolina has to learn how to balance that offense. You can't overwork CMC and expect him to stay healthy. And you know what? I just asked what happened to Sam Darnold. It kind of correlates with CMC being out. Their whole offense kind of fell apart once CMC went away. DJ Moore was having a top 5 wide receiver season before CMC went down. Sam Darnold was a top 5 fantasy quarterback. So that would make sense. If he comes back, maybe that'll help them. And it's weird. The Panthers are so let's bring in Teddy Bridgewater. Nope, he sucks. Let's get him out of here. All right, let's bring in Sam Darnold. Oh, he sucks. Let's bench him for his backup. We'll see what ends up happening there. That's interesting.
Yeah, CMC is more than just a running back on the field. The dude is just a weapon the whole defense has to watch, so it makes everyone better. Yep.
Absolutely. All righty, well, that'll do it for this episode of the First Round Fantasy Podcast. Thank you all for joining us. We really, really do appreciate it. Don't forget to follow us on all our social media platforms, and don't forget to pick up some First Round Fantasy gear at TeePublic. Just search for First Round Fantasy. You can find the links to all those things in our description below. Thanks, Justin, for joining me. I'm Jacob Bartley, and we'll see you guys next Wednesday for our Week 10 coverage. Peace out.